Welcome to the deep dive.
Hello.
So today, we're taking a really close look at just one specific account. It's someone's personal experience, basically, of being completely, utterly out of their depth in a new culture.
Yeah, it's a real deep dive into that feeling, that
Mhm.
lost in translation feeling and navigating what we sometimes call culture shock.
Right. And our mission here really is to unpack this particular story. We want to pull out the key lessons it offers, understand what happens when we step outside our usual world.
Step into somewhere with totally different rules.
Exactly. And this story, it takes place on a busy street in Tokyo.
Okay. Yeah.
So the story kicks off with someone, the account calls them Alex. Let's stick with that. And it's only their second day in Japan, feeling pretty hungry.
Understandable.
So they walk into this small restaurant, looks very traditional, sounds like exactly the kind of, authentic experience you'd be hoping
Oh,
to.
absolutely. That's what you travel for, right?
Yeah.
But the first hurdle they hit instantly is the language barrier.
Yeah. No shared English.
None. And the menu.
All in Japanese characters, no pictures to help out either.
Oof, that's tough. It's a situation I think a lot of travelers can immediately relate to. That feeling of kind of helplessness, just trying to order food.
Totally. So, okay, English isn't working. The waiter is like smiling, trying to be helpful, but there's just no understanding happening.
Right. Communication breakdown.
So what's the last resort?
Yeah.
They point randomly at something on the menu.
Ah, the random menu point.
Yeah.
Yes. A strategy born of, well, pure necessity when nothing else works.
Definitely.
Though, as this story really shows, maybe not the best approach when you're actually, counting on getting something specific or even edible sometimes.
Tell me about it. So our friend Alex was kind of hoping for something like, I don't know, a sandwich, something familiar.
Manageable.
But what arrives, okay, first, miso soup, then a bowl of plain white rice, and then something they were definitely not expecting.
Which was
Pickled radish.
pickled radish. Okay.
And the account describes it really vividly. It looked bright yellow, apparently, like a banana skin.
Huh.
But the taste was startlingly sour and salty. Like a salty lemon is how they put it.
Wow. Quite a sensory surprise then, especially if you're bracing yourself for, well, almost anything but that.
A huge difference. And this specific moment, trying to sort of politely smile and say thank you while inside, you're thinking, okay, this is really not what I wanted.
Yeah.
That's described as the precise instant they realized, like, definitively, okay, I am very far from home.
That really captures it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
A core feeling of culture shock. That sudden sense of being almost like a child again, unfamiliar with basic things.
Like the language, the customs.
Even just how to navigate eating with maybe new utensils they weren't used to.
Right. So let's dig into some of the specific ideas this account brings up. First off, culture shock. The source defines it basically as that confusion, maybe discomfort you feel when you're in a place with totally different customs, language, ways of doing things.
And I think the really important takeaway from this person's experience, the way it's framed, is that it's completely normal. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's not like you've failed somehow. It's just part of the process. It can be challenging, sure, even frustrating, but often it's also what pushes you to learn and adapt.
Like maybe becoming a chopstick master within a week, as they apparently claimed they did.
Well, perhaps a slight exaggeration there from Alex.
Really just a bit.
But the point stands, right? Immersion forces you to learn quickly. You improve because you have to face those challenges.
Absolutely. Okay, the other key concept that comes out of this story is lost in translation.
And that's really about when something just doesn't get understood correctly because you're communicating between different languages.
Like ordering one thing.
And because of that language gap, you end up with something totally different from what you actually intended or wanted.
Which is a pretty perfect description of aiming for a sandwich and getting soup, rice, and pickled radish, especially after using the point randomly method.
Exactly. And speaking of that, point randomly. The source just defines it as, well, choosing something without knowing what it is, just by gesturing.
Yeah. And the account strongly advises against this particular strategy, especially when actual hunger is involved.
A hard-won piece of wisdom, I imagine. No doubt about that.
So beyond just the confusion and, the hunger, the story also touches on the emotional side. There was this feeling of being a little embarrassed.
Oh, sure. That vulnerability is a huge part of stepping outside your comfort zone, isn't it?
Yeah.
You feel exposed when even simple interactions become difficult, and you might, make mistakes in public.
But here's where the story, I think, takes a really lovely, heartwarming turn. and it's a great insight from the source material.
Okay.
Someone nearby noticed the struggle. A man sitting at another table, he just smiled and actually showed Alex how to eat the pickled radish.
Ah, that's wonderful. That small act of human connection, right? It can make such a huge difference in that moment when you feel isolated and lost. It just cuts right through the language barrier. And it highlights how often people really are willing to help when they see you're genuinely trying.
And he even helped them learn a vital Japanese word,
Oishi,
oishi.
meaning delicious,
Mm-hmm.
which is, a perfect word to learn, especially when you're trying new things, even if it wasn't the sandwich you first pictured.
Definitely a useful one. So, okay, looking back at this specific moment, this whole experience described in the source, what are the main lessons we can really pull out? What does it tell us about navigating new places?
Well, I think the key insights here are actually incredibly practical, and they resonate, pretty deeply. First, it really underlines that feeling confused, making mistakes. It's not just, okay, it's kind of unavoidable. It's part of it.
It's how you learn.
Exactly. Acknowledging that confusion instead of, fighting it or feeling bad about it, that's a huge first step in adapting.
And that connects right back to the moment of help, doesn't it? The source really emphasizes that when you're clearly trying, maybe struggling a bit, but visibly making the effort, people often are genuinely kind. They're willing to step in, and just combating that feeling of isolation is so important for getting through culture shock.
Absolutely. That moment of connection, it just broke through the hopelessness. And then finally, there's the very practical lesson learned from this whole pickled radish situation.
Nice one.
The value of having modern tools like Google Translate on your phone. It's not, a magic wand, but it can bridge those communication gaps that the point randomly method definitely cannot.
So true. So what started out as, a potentially awkward, maybe frustrating moment with some unexpected pickled radish, it clearly turned into a really significant learning experience, as documented here.
Yeah, it's a great example of how these moments, even the slightly embarrassing ones, they're fundamental, really. Fundamental to the journey of learning and growth when you immerse yourself somewhere new. They force you to adapt, rely on kindness, use new tools.
Okay, so let's quickly recap the main learnings we've pulled from diving into this source today. First, culture shock. It's a normal, expected feeling when you hit different customs and languages, and it's actually a big opportunity for growth.
Right. Second, being lost in translation is super common when you're trying to communicate across languages. It happens.
Third, when you show you're trying, really making an effort, even if you're struggling, people are often surprisingly kind and willing to help out.
And finally, practical tools like translation apps, they are invaluable. They can really help mitigate some of that confusion and helplessness.
And we pulled out some pretty vivid concepts and words from the source, too. Culture shock, lost in translation, that unforgettable pickled radish.
Don't forget pointing randomly.
Can't forget that. The feeling of being embarrassed. And that useful Japanese word, oishi.
Oishihi. Delicious.
This account really hammers home the idea that experiencing culture shock, it isn't some unique failure. It's a shared human thing whenever we step outside our familiar bubble.
Yeah, it's messy. It can be uncomfortable sometimes, absolutely. But it really is a fundamental part of learning and, growing as a person.
And it gives you such a clear picture of what it feels like to be the outsider, right? Trying to figure things out in unfamiliar territory.
Definitely puts you in those shoes.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe ponder as you think about this story. This account is all about the feeling of experiencing culture shock yourself, being the one who's lost, confused. But think about this. Culture shock isn't always a one-way street. What happens when you, just by doing things your normal way, might accidentally cause a feeling of culture shock or maybe just confusion in someone else who's new to your environment?
That's a really interesting flip. It's worth considering. And actually, the source even hints there's another story coming up about a situation just like that.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading that. The one involving cheese, I think.
Cheese and confusion. Sounds intriguing.
Definitely something to chew on until our next deep dive.